Welcome to the NC Spin After Spin. Additional comments from our panelists just available on our website. I want to ask you, what do you wish you had said on last week's show, but you didn't? John Hood, I'll start with you.
Tom, we talked about constitutional changes and about the governance of North Carolina education at various levels. And I think it's important for people to really consider the fact that our current Constitution in North Carolina doesn't really have a coherent answer to the question of how education should be governed. We have a State Board of Education that's appointed by the governor, but there's a legislative role. You have a UNC Board of Governors that is elected by the legislature. The governor has no role. You have community college boards that's sort of a mix and match. You have boards of trustees that are a mix and match. There needs to be some coherence. Now, I'm not saying all have to be staffed the same way, or they all have to be the same size or have the same authority, but it needs to make more sense. It was clearly not thought out rationally. These entities have all grown up completely separate from each other, and they all, not only, as we've said before, is there some interrelationship that needs to occur through some formal process or planning or discussion across the three systems, but it would help if you didn't have a small board here and a big board here, even though the small board oversees more people. I mean, it just doesn't make any real sense.
Well, we've talked about it on NC Spin for many years, the governance issues regarding education, public and higher in North Carolina. Dennis Wicker, what do you wish you'd have said on last week's show?
Well, Tom, we did talk a lot about education on the show, and we also noted that the governor announced his pay raise plan for teachers in our public schools. And, you know, I listened to that and thought, you know, wouldn't it be nice if we, first of all, had a comprehensive plan for education in the state, not just piecemeal for teachers here and others there. For example, I think in North Carolina, pay our principals, which are the chief operating officers, chief executive officers of every school, the most important position by far by every measure of education in a school. We pay our principals, as I understand it, one of the lowest in the Southeast.
That's correct. Well, the lowest in the nation.
And in the nation. And then I'd like to see us look at some of the retirement benefits, similar like the military does, where you have a rich retirement system for those teachers who stay 25 and 30 years. Because one of the biggest problems we have is teachers leaving the profession. But if they teach for that 25 or 30 years, we could have a way to keep them there in the schools. And I just think we need to be thinking about policies like that instead of this piecemeal stuff we're getting.
Interesting proposition. Joe Mavretic, what do you wish you'd have said on last week's show?
Well, I just touched on the fact that every generation ought to have an opportunity to vote about and on the Constitution, which is really a social contract, the Constitution under which they're going to live for the next 25 or 50 years. And the Constitution itself in Section 1, Section 35 of Article 1 says that we ought to return to the principles from time to time and look at and see how we're going. Well, the comments about education having 3 towers is exactly on point, but because we don't revisit the Constitution on a regular basis, I'm not saying annually, but at least every 50 years, if not every 25 or so, yeah, then the people who are affected and under that state constitution have no say in it. And I think that's not what a democracy or a republic ought to be about, what a sovereign state ought to be about. And I'm not challenging the Constitution of the United States. That's kind of like saying, this is the field upon which you play, but the rules within that field are up to the several states, and they ought to be. Even if some states make severe errors, they ought to be allowed to do that, if nothing else, as an example to the other 49 states.
Chris Fitzsimon, what do you wish you'd have said on last week's show?
Well, you asked about the proposal to reduce the Board of Governors from 32 to 24. I am concerned, as some members mentioned at the time, that it'll reduce the diversity on the board, not just racial diversity, but the diversity of the campuses that are represented. I wish we could go back to when we had members of the minority party who was on the board. I think this is the latest episode in a feud, frankly, between the Board of Governors and the legislature. You mentioned you had heard it was getting rid of some members. I've heard several Board of Governors have said, some have said publicly, some have said privately, some of them believe they're working for the best interest of the university. Others believe they're working for the members of the General Assembly who elected them. So that's one thing. The second thing that happened over the weekend, this past week in the university system, is UNC President Margaret Spellings wrote a passionate op-ed in the Washington Post saying she hoped that President Trump didn't change the Deferred Action Program for kids who came here illegally when they were 2, 3, 4, or 5 years old, have grown up here, have gone through school. They're called the Dreamers that President Obama said, we're not going to go after you. You've led a productive life. You came here for no fault of your own. President Trump campaigned, said he was going to go after him. Now he sort of backed off a little.
Well,
he's backed off now, but his rhetoric has
it.
changed. He said he was going to have a heart, but it's not clear what's going to happen to them. I thought it was really interesting that the UNC president weighed in on that. It's interesting to see what effect that has.
Well, thank you for watching the After Spin. We'll have more video all during the week on ncspin.com.